your Zoom screen. It's usually in the upper right corner if you're on a PC or laptop. For other devices, you may need to look around a bit. When you find it, click on View, then Speaker View. Now, Margie Fields, our Sierra Club Snow Isle co-chair, will give the land acknowledgement as soon as I can see if I can share it. All right.
Well, that's okay. We begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, who since time immemorial have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. By acknowledging these homelands, we are also committing to working with tribal nations to further the aims we share in common, to protect and enrich our environment, and to bring greater social justice to all. And I would like to add my welcome to Nancy's. I'm Margie Fields, co-chair of the Snow Isle Sierra Club, as Nancy said. At the League of Women Voters in Snow Isle, Sierra Club are very happy you could join us tonight. We will be hearing how the Washington State Growth Management Act, commonly referred to as the GMA, affects growth in Snohomish County. The GMA guides where the 420,000 additional people expected in the county by 2050 will live and work. In our region, the law moves through the Puget Sound Regional Council Vision 2050. In our own county, cities and tribes meet as Snohomish County tomorrow to use Vision 2050 in implementing the GMA. They recommend county-wide planning policies to the county council. Additionally, the public and the county may submit new policy to our comprehensive plan through docket items to be adopted in 2024. We're excited that this will include a docket about urban trees. The public will have many opportunities to provide guidance for our county government during this process, making sure that it responds with environmental equity for our living community. Here's a bit of background on one of tonight's sponsors, the Sierra Club. It is the oldest and largest environmental organization in the United States, founded by John Muir in 1892, with currently nearly 4 million members. The Snow Isle group of the Washington Sierra Club serves both Snohomish and Island counties. We have over 3,000 members and work closely with hundreds of other volunteers in our allied organizations. We are volunteers who work on climate action and conservation, as well as social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. We also identify and support political candidates who share our goals. In our spare time, we enjoy the outdoors that we strive to protect, and we encourage others to get out too. We invite you to join us in our work and play. Tonight, we are proud to partner with the League of Women Voters, Snohomish County, in sponsoring this event. The National League was founded over 100 years ago with the vision of empowering voters and defending democracy. It is my honor to introduce the president of the League of Women Voters, Snohomish County, and my personal hero, Kate Lunsford, who will tell you more about the League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Margie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The League of Women Voters of Snohomish County is a nonpartisan grassroots political organization. We neither support nor oppose any political party or any candidate, but we encourage informed and active participation in government. As one of the several programs of work of our league, the Natural Resources Committee has taken on a program to mount a tree campaign in the urban growth area of Snohomish County. We will advocate for legislation and policies to protect and enhance urban tree canopy as a response to the climate crisis. We will educate and join the public on tree stewardship, We will coordinate with partners to create opportunities for tree canopy planting and maintenance. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight from Futurewise. Tim Trahimovich, currently the Director of Planning and Law, joined Futurewise in 2001. He focuses on policy, education, technical assistance, and land use and environmental law. He has over 30 years of planning experience. He is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, the Washington and Oregon Bar Associations, and the Bar Association of the United States Supreme Court. In 2011, Tim was one of 3 Instructors of the Year for the University of Washington's Professional and Continuing Education Program. He co-wrote a chapter for Planning the Pacific Northwest, published in 2015 by the American Planning Association. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here tonight from the League of Women Voters and the Sierra Club. And I appreciate all of you who are taking time out of your busy schedules to, I guess, tune in tonight. Very much appreciate it. Let me get my PowerPoint shared here, please. Oh, there we go. And as you heard, I'm going to be talking about the Growth Management Act. But before we do, just a little bit about Futurewise. We're also nonpartisan. We're a nonprofit 501c3. We do not work on candidate elections, but we do work on land use and environmental policy. We work throughout Washington state. We do research and analysis. We advocate for better planning and to improve the Growth Management Act, both before local governments, such as the Snohomish County Comprehensive Plan, and also before state agencies and the legislature. And we file strategic appeals of poor planning decisions. We also assist citizen groups, the public, and state and local governments as they do their work to plan for a better future. Tonight, what I hope you'll get out of this presentation and the questions that we're going to have afterwards is, what's planning under the Growth Management Act like? And what are the tools that can be used to make better communities? How the Puget Sound Regional Council's new Vision 2050 will influence planning in Snohomish County. How Snohomish County tomorrow in the Buildable Lands Report and the countywide planning policies will influence the comprehensive plan update and likely issues in the update and why you should participate. So why plan? Well, one of the reasons to plan is that the development and community on the right sure looks better than the development community on the left. Although I have to say, that's on the left. It's Los Angeles, and a lot of people I know really love Los Angeles, and it has many great neighborhoods in it. But planning can save taxpayers money. Planning can be more inclusive. We can intentionally involve people and the entire community, both in planning for the future and then make sure they have what they need to have successful futures. Planning can also better protect fish and wildlife habitats, which is an important issue for many people on this Zoom and many people that participate in planning. And so that's why we plan. And of course, in Washington state, in the case of Snohomish County, another reason we plan is that it's required by the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Act, and you can see there's a sort of diagram here that I borrowed from the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050, is the overall state law that both authorizes and requires counties and cities in Washington state to plan. And it contains both authorizations and tools that they can use, goals and requirements. One of the requirements in the Growth Management Act is that King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties have to put together multi-county planning policies and a regional plan for the future, which is the current version of which is called Vision 2050, which was just adopted late last year. Kitsap County opted into the multi-county planning policies, so it's also a part of Vision 2050. So the idea behind the multi-county planning policies is that the counties and the cities get together, they put together a set of policies to take advantages of opportunities that we all share, and also to address problems that we have in common, like traffic and affordable housing. The county, Snohomish County, and the cities in the county put together countywide planning policies, and these countywide planning policies tend to be more specific than Vision 2050. They take the population targets from Vision 2050 and allocate them to individual jurisdictions in Snohomish County, and again, work on common problems and common opportunities. And then local government, county and city comprehensive plans comply with the Growth Management Act. They include Vision 2050 in the policies that they put together, and then the countywide planning policies in there as well. So it's kind of a cascade of authorities that guide local government comprehensive plans. As I said, the Growth Management Act has goals, requirements, and tools. There's 14 goals. They range from reducing sprawl, protecting the environment, encouraging affordable housing, and other topics as well. There are a set of requirements that plans and development regulations have to meet, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those. And there are tools for making better communities, such as impact fees, which I'll also mention more about. Snohomish County and its cities fully planned under the Growth Management Act. That means they are required to do comprehensive plans, to have development regulations such as zoning, and also to have critical areas regulations. There are some other counties in Washington state, 10 counties, that don't fully plan under the Growth Management Act, and they're only required to adopt critical area designations and regulations, and then designations of natural resource lands. So why do we have a Growth Management Act? One of the reasons is that Washington is a fast-growing state. This graph shows actual populations from 1980 through 2020. And as you can see, during that period of time, the state grew by a lot. Washington state grew by 85% from 1980 to 2020. Snohomish County grew even faster. It grew by over 145% during that same period of time. Those are big increases for states, and for Snohomish County, that's also a big increase for the county. And as you can also see from the graph on the far right-hand side, there's also the potential for a lot of future growth. The Office of Financial Management, which puts out, the State Office of Financial Management, which puts out the projections that counties and cities use in their planning, with a modification that I'll mention in a little bit, projects a range for the state of 7.9 million people to 10.9 million people by 2040. And counties and cities in Washington state pick populations within that range, and then they plan for them. But as you can see, 10.9 is a lot of people, considering that we're a little over 7.6 million right now. So Washington state's grown quickly historically, and it's continuing to do so. But in the 1980s, what we found is that the state didn't have the tools to deal with the rapid growth during that period of time. There were over 800,000 people, or almost 800,000 people who moved to the state in the 80s, a million that moved in the 90s, and there weren't the tools to deal with it. So the legislature adopted the Growth Management Act, both to require planning and to provide local governments with the tools that they need. So what are the Growth Management Act planning processes and requirements? As I mentioned when I talked about the graph, the first step in that process is to adopt countywide planning policies as a framework for county and city planning. In most counties, including Snohomish County, those are done cooperatively between the county and the cities. The next step is to designate and protect critical areas and natural resource lands, and I'll mention a little bit more about that later. But critical areas are areas that are either valuable for their natural functions, such as fish and wildlife habitats, or dangerous to build on, such as wetlands or geologically hazardous areas. natural resource lands are farmlands, forest lands, and mineral resource lands that have long-term commercial significance and that we would like to see continuing to be used for those productive industries. After those areas are adopted or are designated, excuse me, and set aside, then local governments designate urban growth areas. Urban growth areas, as you can imagine from the name, are areas where counties and cities plan for city-like growth. That's where your multifamily housing is going to be. That's where most of your factories are. That's where your large commercial uses are located, large office buildings, uses like that. They're in the urban growth area. And there's specific requirements that they be sized so that they can accommodate the 20-year projected growth. Once those are done, counties and individual cities prepare and adopt their comprehensive plan. That typically includes a vision for the future. It includes policies on how to transform the physical development of the community so that the local community gets the type of community it wants. County comprehensive plans only apply in the unincorporated area. So Snohomish County's comprehensive plan doesn't apply in Everett. It doesn't apply in Lake Stevens. In those communities, it's the city comprehensive plans that matter. But the county comprehensive plan applies to the unincorporated urban growth area. It applies to rural lands, and it applies to farms and forests and mineral resource lands. Once that's done, local governments prepare and adopt development regulations. This includes regulations like zoning, which identify which parts of the community are going to have residential development, which parts of the community are going to have commercial development, which parts of the community are going to have manufacturing development, which parts of the community are going to have mixed use development. And for counties, what are the rules for rural areas, areas outside urban growth areas, and what are the rules for farmland and forest and mineral resource lands. And so those are prepared and they're adopted. Once they're done, and every jurisdiction in Snohomish County has actually gone through this process and done all these steps, then they're continuously evaluated and they have to be updated at least once every 8 or 10 years. And whether you do it on an 8-year cycle or a 10-year cycle depends on your rate of growth and where you're located. In Snohomish County, because it's a fast-growing county, all of the county and the cities have an 8-year update requirement. Although there is a bill in the legislature that would change that to a 10-year update requirement. And while the counties and cities are undertaking these steps, continuous public involvement is required. The public needs to be involved in those initial steps and throughout the whole process. And so public involvement has been referred to as one of the keystones of the Growth Management Act. It's really important to involve the community so that community priorities can inform our planning for our future. I mentioned critical areas. Critical areas, there are 5 of them, although there are a variety of critical areas sort of within critical areas, include wetlands, include areas that are used for potable water, aquifers that are used for potable water, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, frequently flooded areas, and geologically hazardous areas, such as landslides and erosion hazard areas, areas like that. And local governments are required to adopt criteria for designating these areas, and then they're required to adopt regulations that result in no net loss of the functions and values of these areas. So local governments are required to designate and protect wetlands. They're required to designate fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. And as science improves, as we learn more about these areas, they need to update it. Because one of the hallmarks of critical areas is it needs to be based on science, and it needs to be based on best available science. Best available science doesn't mean that there's one study that tells us how to protect wetlands, but what it does mean is that the science that we use to protect wetlands needs to be valid science. It needs to follow the hallmarks of science, needs to be done using proper methods by people who have the proper training and qualifications. And often it means that it needs to be peer reviewed by other scientists so we can make sure that it was done correctly. It has to be available, it has to be in the record, has to be practical and economically feasible. And of course, it has to be science, which is a process for understanding the workings of the natural world, of the natural environment. And so if you participate in the review and update of critical areas ordinance, you'll hear a lot of talk about what's best available science, and it's not really that hard. Uh, you just need to make sure that it meets the standards. And state agencies and federal agencies, for that matter, have published tens of guidebooks for managing critical areas that are in the public domain that you and the local government can download, and that provide really valuable information for managing and protecting these critical areas. One of the other requirements of the Growth Management Act that fits in with critical areas designation and protection are open space corridors. The idea behind open space corridors, and you can see one on the right, is that we're going to link up our fish and wildlife habitats, our wetlands, our protected forests, so that fish can move between them, so that animals can move between them, so that plants can move between them, so they can maintain those natural functions that they've had. And it prevents unconnected islands of habitat and the problems that that creates. So that's an important function or an important requirement of the Growth Management Act. Well, okay, so we've got our plan for the future. We know where we're going to put our houses. We know where we're going to put our mixed uses. We know where we're going to put our manufacturing facilities. How do we get them, the sewers, the water, the streets, the roads, the other facilities they need? The capital facilities plan element is the way that planning is done. And it's a really important part of the Growth Management Act. Before the Growth Management Act, capital facilities planning wasn't required in Washington state, but it is now. You first inventory your existing capital facilities, where they're located and what their capacities are. You forecast the future needs for those facilities. You propose new locations for those facilities, and then an at least 5-year financing plan that with clearly identified funding sources to pay for it. Snohomish County, which I think is a really good practice, also has a 20-year financing plan for its transportation element and its capital facilities element as well. There's a requirement to reassess the land use element if funding falls short for the public facilities that are needed to serve the development and to help coordinate it. There's also an opportunity to assess if facilities are equitably distributed throughout a community. Do all parts of unincorporated Snohomish County or all parts of the city of Everett have access to parks? That's a question that you can answer through the capital facility plan. Either is there a park there now, or is it planned for the future? Or are there areas that need water lines that don't have water lines now, or sewer lines? Those are all taken into account when the capital facility plan is prepared. One of the other requirements of the Growth Management Act that was borrowed from Florida is transportation concurrency. And the idea here is simple. We're just going to try to match growth with the transportation facilities that are needed to serve that growth. And strategies have to be in place when a building's occupied, or there has to be a financial commitment to put them in place within 6 years of the building being occupied. These strategies can include highway, street, or road projects, increased public transportation, ride sharing program, demand management, or other trip reduction strategies as well. So the idea is, as we grow, we'll have the transportation facilities. As you are probably aware, this is a fairly controversial provision. There's a lot of opinions about how well concurrency is working in Washington state and certainly in Snohomish County, but it is one of the GMA requirements. The Growth Management Act also gave local governments some tools to deal with growth. One of them is impact fees. Impact fees are a fee that new development pays to pay for the capital facilities that it needs to operate and to open. You can use impact fees for public streets and roads, for publicly owned parks, open spaces and recreational facilities, school facilities, and fire protection facilities. And those are what you can do in Washington. Other states actually allow impact fees to be more broadly assessed. But in Washington, we're limited to these 4 functional areas. Climate change, as you know, is a big issue, and almost half of Washington's greenhouse gas pollution is from transportation. The second largest category is heating and cooling and operating buildings. Sprawl makes it worse because the more things are spread out, the longer people have to drive, the less they can walk and bike to work or to meet their daily needs. There's some GMA goals and policies that can help reduce greenhouse gas pollution, such as the environment goal, which requires you to reduce air pollution, and the requirement to stop, and the goal to stop sprawl. Some other requirements can help as well to adapt to climate change, such as increased rainstorm intensity, rising sea level rise. However, as I'll talk about in a little bit, there are amendments in the legislature that would explicitly address climate change mitigation and adaptation, and those would be helpful to address climate change. Okay, so local government updates its comprehensive plan, updates its development regulations, and you don't think they did a very good job. You don't think they complied with state law or that they didn't do a good job of planning for the capital facilities that are needed. What can you appeal after an update is completed? And these appeals go to a state agency called the Growth Management Hearings Board. It consists now of 6 people, the majority of which are lawyers, although there's also 2 former local government officials on the board. The board acts in 3-person panels, and you can appeal a failure to conduct a review. So if a local government doesn't complete its review, you can appeal that. Okanagan County, for example, was required to update its critical areas regulations about 8 years ago. They've never done it. They could be appealed to require them to meet that deadline. You can appeal the urban growth areas if the Office of Financial Management has issued a new population projection, which they do twice a decade. And so you do tend to get a fair number of appeals of urban growth area expansions or the size of urban growth areas. Futurewise has done a number of appeals of urban growth area expansions in Snohomish County. You can also appeal provisions that were required to be amended to comply with new provisions in state law but weren't. And then you can also appeal what the local government actually adopted, either through an amendment. So those are the 4 categories that you can appeal to the Growth Management Hearings Board. You don't have to be a lawyer to appeal to the Growth Management Hearings Board, and citizens throughout Washington state have appealed comprehensive plans, development regulations, critical areas regulations to the boards and won, even though the county or city was defended by attorneys. So it is something that you can do. Is it working? Well, peer-reviewed studies have been done, and they have found that the GMA has been successful in containing development within urban growth areas and protecting farms and forests. We're not as successful as Oregon is in their system, but we are making some success. A peer-reviewed study also showed that we're getting more growth in center cities. Cities like Everett are experiencing more growth than comparable cities in other states. And so we have less hollowing out of our central cities than there is occurring in other states. There's also been studies that have shown that fish and wildlife habitats are being protected as well. So it is working, although it can be improved. So that's the Growth Management Act. Remember, I also mentioned Vision 2050 and the multi-county planning policies. One of the important parts of Vision 2050 is that they have allocated growth throughout the 4-county region. And you might not be able to see it very well. You can see that Snohomish County's line and also bar chart here is that gray color, and Snohomish County is being planned on accommodating about 24% of the region's growth between now and 2050. That's about 42,000, 24,000 people. And this slide breaks that down by jurisdiction. There's the Vision 2050 geography, what Vision 2050 calls jurisdictions. Then I've included the jurisdiction name and then the residents that we're planning for. Everett is classified as a metropolitan city. It's the only one in the county, and they're required to plan for 87,000 people by 2050. The core cities of Bothell and Linwood are required to plan for 50,000. The high capacity transit communities are required to plan to accommodate the largest amount of population growth within Snohomish County at 210,000 people. The remaining cities and towns have a planning target of 40,500. The unincorporated urban growth area has a target of 18,000. The rural area, 18,500. And that totals up to the 42,000, 24,000. As you can see, for some of these jurisdictions, Everett, for example, we've got a number already. So that's pretty clear. But for the high capacity transit communities, Vision 2050 doesn't tell us how to allocate that growth. And that will be addressed in the countywide planning policies that Snohomish County tomorrow will do. In addition to the population allocations, Vision 2050 includes the countywide, or the multi-county planning policies. There, the idea is to focus growth in cities. We're going to plan to support transit-oriented growth around existing and planned infrastructure, maintain a variety of community types, densities, and sizes. That's the idea behind those different geographies in Vision 2050. Support jobs, housing services, and other activities, maintain stable urban growth areas, conserve rural and natural resource lands. Snohomish County will likely update its countywide planning policies to incorporate what's new in Vision 2050 in the multi-county planning policies. Snohomish County tomorrow is the body that does the most work on the countywide planning policies. And again, here what we're doing is and Snohomish County does this, we bring together representatives from the county, we bring together representatives from 19 of the cities and the Tulalip tribes to work together on allocating population, on working on common solutions for common problems, and also working on how those jurisdictions can work together to take advantage of opportunities. And so they come together, they put together the updates to the countywide planning policies, which are meant to be fairly specific and apply to the county as a whole. And they also adopt the 20-year population targets and have policies to coordinate planning and address common issues. Another important piece of information in the comprehensive plan update is the buildable lands report. The buildable lands report is a requirement that applies to the largest and fastest growing counties in Western Washington and the cities within them. And the idea here is we're going to monitor growth to see if it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the countywide planning policies. So a bunch of data is gathered by growth. The buildable lands report measures whether there's enough land to develop and redevelop it within the urban growth area to absorb the planned population and employment growth. If growth is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, or there's not enough land, then the county or city, whichever has a shortfall or an inconsistency, has to adopt reasonable measures to try to increase consistency between the comprehensive plan and where growth is actually going. Urban growth areas can't be expanded unless there's a documented need for additional land. And one of the ideas behind reasonable measures is that before we try to do that, we're going to see whether the population can be accommodated within the plan as well. Okay, so those are inputs into the Snohomish County Comprehensive Plan. Another input into the Snohomish County Comprehensive Plan are requests for amendments both by private property owners, by businesses, and by cities. And the Snohomish County process for deciding which of those requests for amendments are going to be considered as part of the comprehensive planning process is called docketing. And it's kind of a pre-look at people's ideas for amendments to the comprehensive plan. They apply to the Snohomish County Department of Planning and Community Services. The department Development Services. The department makes a recommendation. The Planning Commission considers that recommendation and then makes a recommendation to the county council to include or not include the county council decides what proposals they're going to consider as part of the comprehensive plan update. At both the planning commission level and the county council level, there are public comment periods and a public hearing in front of both of them. So you can support amendments, you can oppose amendments, or docketing requests, really they're not amendments at this point. The county council can also add proposals to the docket. So it's both what the individuals, companies, and cities apply for, but it's also what the county council would like to see considered in the comprehensive plan. And the current docket requests, which are referred to as docket 21, because it's the 21st time that the county has considered amendments to its comprehensive plan, are going to be considered as part of Snohomish County's 2024 periodic update. And that update is going to be concluded on June 30th of 2024. So that the deadline for those docket requests have closed, and soon county staff and then the planning commission and the county council will decide which of those docketing requests will be formally considered as part of the 2024 comprehensive plan update. So what kind of issues are we likely to see? Well, right now there's a number of urban growth area expansions proposed for including in the docketing. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the buildable lands report shows there's a need for additional land in the urban growth area. Because again, urban growth areas have to be sized for the planned growth. They can't be too large. They can include what's called a market factor, which is kind of a margin of error, but it has to be sized for its planned growth. And there's also the issue of Vision 2050, which calls for stable urban growth areas. And what does that mean? It probably means you can add a little bit to the urban growth area, but can you add thousands of acres? Well, from my perspective, stable doesn't seem like adding thousands of acres to the urban growth area. So we'll find out. There's also an agricultural lands designation proposed. Futurewise tends to participate a lot in those. There'll be updates to the transportation and capital facility elements to support the new population projections, the new planned. One of the issues in that will be whether the 20-year transportation element will be fully funded. Right now, it's not fully funded. The 6-year plan is fully funded, but not the 20-year. And so there need to be additional revenues for those out years if we're going to build all of the transportation facilities that are in the current transportation element, and probably what's in the future element is too. Trees are going to be a big issue. You heard from the League and the Sierra Club that they're moving forward with an amendment to address trees in the urban growth area. I'm sure there'll be other issues related to trees as well. Just growth. There's been a lot of growth in the 20s the 2010s. There we go. Well, there's a lot of growth in the 20s too, but in the 2010s, and so people I think are asking a lot of questions about growth. How to address rural growth. This was an issue when Vision 2050 was adopted. How much growth should be allocated to unincorporated Snohomish County? That decision was made, and it was kind of in between what the county requested and what the original proposal was. How is rural growth going to be addressed? And particularly, how are issues like providing transportation facilities to them, providing water needs and things like that? How to mitigate and adapt to the global warming crisis. It's becoming more and more evident that we've got problems we need to address. I'm sure that'll be an issue. Salmon, southern resident orcas, and tree rights have been big issues for years, and I'm sure they will be. And one of the great opportunities that Snohomish County has are the new light rail stations coming to the county. And so that's going to be an opportunity as well. Oops, how are we doing on time? As usual, we're a little long, so I'm going to be quick on that. Right now, there are a couple of bills in the legislature that, or a lot of bills in the legislature that would amend the GMA, although some of them are going to die fairly soon. One of them that isn't going to die because it's in House appropriations is House Bill 1099, which will require the 10 fastest growing counties in Washington state to reduce greenhouse gas pollution consistent with the state requirements. And then it requires all counties and cities that fully plan to address sea level rise. Snohomish County is one of those 10 counties. And so if this bill passes, they'll be required to reduce their greenhouse gas pollution. Substitute House Bill 2020 makes the requirements for providing and planning for housing more specific. If that passes, it again would apply to Snohomish County. There's also substitute House Bill 1117, which has sometimes been referred to as the net ecological gain bill. It makes improvements to the requirements for avoiding and mitigating impacts to salmon habitat and other critical areas, and then requires planning for net ecological gain. And that's also in appropriations. Substitute House Bill 1216 is the amendment to the Evergreen Community Program. This would be a nice match to the proposal in Snohomish County to address trees in the urban growth area, because it'll provide more technical assistance to counties such as Snohomish County and the cities in the county to adopt urban forestry management plans and ordinances. It's also in House appropriations. So we'll see how those goes. And that's all I have. And now I really enjoy hearing your questions.
Thank you, Tim, so much. I hope you can hear me. Hold on. That is quite. That is quite proceeding from the state and moving through the county, all the counties, and down to our various agencies. Thank you so much for this presentation. I learned a lot, as I always do when I listen to you now and with your Tim talks at Futurewise. I enjoy this very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we are opening the chat now for folks to put their questions in, and please feel free to ask Tim anything that you'd like to clarify or relate any one thing to another. And Nancy and I will kind of keep an eye on them as we take this opportunity to learn a little bit more about Tim's program. We did have a couple of questions ahead of time, but do feel free to put your questions in the chat. And Tim has actually offered to stay a few minutes late if we need to, so don't feel like we are going to run out of time immediately. But one of the questions, yeah.
Kate, I see a hand up, a digital hand up. Are we going to be looking for those two? Kristen has her hand up.
Kristen, it would be easiest if you would put them in chat, just so that we have kind of a flow of information, because we can't see everybody at the same time. Would that be okay? Let me ask the first question we have. How can the public stay abreast of opportunities to testify at the county hearings?
The county Planning and Community Development Department has a sign up where you can sign up to have information sent to your phone or information emailed to you. And I understand that the League and the Sierra Club is going to send out a series of links after this presentation's over, and one of the links will take you to that website where you can sign up and get individual notice of public hearings, of workshops, of information like that.
Yes, great. We are going to put that information in our follow-up information out to registrants or participants today. Nancy, do you want to take one?
Yeah, so Tim, Tony Okuda had a question. If a city says it's built out and there's no more buildable land, what are the options at that point?
Well, the answer is it depends. One of the reasons that Vision 2050 has these geographies that are lumped together is that it enables the cities and the counties to work together on how to allocate that population. And so if you had a community that truly was built out, then you could have another city take some of their growth target, or maybe even a series of cities take their growth target. There's also opportunities for some really gentle kinds of increases in capacities. For example, accessory dwelling units can be added in backyards or added in existing buildings, and can help accommodate growth that way. And so there's different techniques that cities can use. And if they truly are built out, if there really isn't any capacity, and every now and then you do have a very small community that doesn't have additional capacity, then they can share their growth with the other cities in their category.
Thank you.
Wendy asks if the PowerPoint presentation will be available, and we will have it available both on the Sierra Club site and the League of Women Voters YouTube soon. But I'll just go on to the next one. When you, Linda Matthews asked, when you refer to rural growth, what exactly does that include?
Rural growth typically includes low density residential development. A common sort of cutoff for rural densities is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and then you have 1 dwelling unit per 20 acres or 40 acres, depending on where it's located. It also includes traditional rural activities. Farming, forestry, gravel mining are typically allowed in there, but there are other kinds of traditional rural activities too. There are certain kinds of rural businesses that have been common in the rural area. Horse riding academies, small sawmills, uses like that. So uses that either use resources in the rural land or they're nearby natural resource areas, and residential development.
Thank you. Tim, Kristen has a quick correction. Setting the docket with private proposals do not go through the Planning Commission for public hearing, but just with the County Council.
Oh,
And
thanks,
she says that's
Kristen.
the way and that's the way it's been in the past. So,
Thanks, Kristen.
okay. Thank you.
Esther Cronenberg asked, many environmental advocates have found that state laws and regulations are not being followed because the GMA gives much authority to local governments. In Thurston County, the Chamber of Commerce has an outsized influence on local land use issues. How can citizens pressure Department of Ecology and local governments to follow SEPA and other environmental laws?
Yeah, that's that's one of the downsides of Washington's Growth Management Act is there's not state approval of plans and development regulations like there is in other states such as Oregon or Hawaii. So that's one of the downsides. So what you need to do then is build political support for good planning. Get the right people. We're 501c3, so we can get involved in elections, but local communities do, and get good people elected to the Board of County Commissioners, get good people appointed to the Planning Commission, and then run public campaigns to get them to do the right thing. Get you and your friends to send emails, write letters to the editors, those kinds of community organizing that we all do.
Kristen has another question. UGAs are at 4% growth under Vision 2050, but there are many UGA expansion requests in the docket already. Can you speak to the group about that?
Well, again, the big question is going to be what the buildable lands report provides. Does it show that there's adequate land in the urban growth area? If so, it's going to be very difficult for the county to expand the urban growth area. If it shows that expansions are needed, well, then it'll be an easier row to hoe. But again, there's that overall principle in Vision 2050 where we're going to try to maintain stable urban growth areas. And so we think that the better approach will be to focus growth near light rail, near transit, near public facilities and services that already exist, jobs. So we think that's the better plan for the future.
Julie asks, is there any way the GMA can require tribal commercial development on off-reservation tribal trust lands to comply with the county zoning laws? For example, our local tribe has purchased land, converted it to tribal trust land, and then changed their intended use of the land. For instance, there's a hotel built on parcels they said they would use as a wellhead protection area and to gather native medicinal plants. Those parcels are now paved. Our neighborhood that is zoned R5, rural residential, now contains a casino, hotel, and gas stations, etc.
The Growth Management Act is a state law, so it doesn't apply to trust lands. Under the federal constitution, the treaties that the federal government has agreed to with the Native American tribes and nations are superior to state law. So no, the GMA does not affect that.
Here's a question from Carol. Will the mining efforts for gold and copper on the Skagit headwaters, as an example, be considered under rural growth?
Well, mining isn't allowed rural use. However, it's, given the status of those lands, I think it's going to be very difficult for the people who want to mine them to actually get the federal permits to do that.
And Pam asks, how much has the GMA contributed to the spiraling housing costs in the Puget Sound area, and what can be done to assure affordable housing in the high density areas?
Okay, well, that's a controversial topic. Depending on what studies you look at, they actually show that it hasn't had much effect, that it's really demand driven that's driving up the prices and the kinds of housing product that builders want to build. Other studies have shown that there's a significant impact in development regulation generally on housing costs. I tend to think that it's a mix of all of those things, but there are ways that we can get more affordable housing. One, we need to make sure that we've got densities that are affordable. There are densities that are needed to actually be able to build housing that's affordable. Depending on your community, those are probably in the neighborhood of 18 to 40 to 60 units per acre. So we need to make sure we've got enough land at those densities. There are also programs that local governments can put in place that can help generate affordable housing. There's a provision called inclusionary zoning where you give developers development bonuses, but require that a certain percentage of the housing be affordable to certain income groups. There's also funding that the federal government has, state government has, and that some local governments have as well to subsidize housing for very low income families. So there's a variety of programs that we can do to get more affordable housing. The housing bill I mentioned includes requirements to plan for that.
Thank you. Aisha asks, what communication tools can be used with city council members who persist in making decisions that reject increased density in areas that meet appropriate requirements?
Well, one of the most effective tools that I found is peer education. If you can find a similar jurisdiction that has done what you think makes sense, try to get your city council people to talk to that city or that city council. In fact, maybe they could even invite a member to come to one of their meetings from the city that's doing a good job, and sort of peer-to-peer communications, I think, is a really valuable tool for doing that. And of course, just political influence. Get a bunch of people to send emails, to show up at the public hearings, to show up at the public comment periods, and explain why they need to do a better job on providing affordable housing in the right densities.
And Karen asks, what are the criteria for assessing buildable lands? How does the analysis done by the reporting entity define capacity and density? Well,
Okay.
that's a big question.
Yeah, well, it's the short answer is they look at what's being built. And so, for example, you look at your single family zones and see what the densities are being achieved under those zones. And you look at what land can't be built on. Some of it can't be built on because it's critical areas. Some can't be built on because they're needed for public facilities, such as roads, sidewalks, things like that. But you look at your actual growth see what's happening and then make adjustments as needed to do that. But that's what the buildable lands report is about, seeing what have been past lot yields and then transferring that into used to estimate future lot yields or housing unit yields.
Michelle has an interesting question. She lives in the urban growth area in unincorporated Everett, and neighbors over the back fence live in the city of Everett. She knows that one of the intents of the GMA is to annex the urban growth areas and create logical city boundaries. Do you know of any policy changes that address this? Will Snohomish County have urban growth areas indefinitely, or is the plan for UGAs to eventually be annexed to their cities?
Well, that's what the Growth Management Act calls for. Washington, however, tends to be a city, or excuse me, not a city, excuse me, a state where annexation can be difficult. Many states have easier annexation processes than Washington. That's actually an issue that's being discussed in this legislative session about should there be tools that cities can use to encourage annexation. When I was working with cities, I found that the most important or most valuable tool was to just sort of go out, knock on doors, and explain to people why they're better off in the city rather than the county. And when I was at the city of Redmond, we could actually show people who annexed that their property taxes were going to go down. Not every city can do that, but some can. So I think, knocking on doors is the way to do it. You have to be objective. You can't electioneer if you're a local government staffer, but you can educate.
You mentioned something in the legislature. Is there a bill we should be looking for?
I don't, right off the top of my head, I'm not aware if a bill has been dropped on that issue. They're looking at a couple of different concepts. There have been incentives that the legislature has provided, financial incentives for cities to annex. So if that continues, that might just be in the budget. But again, I'm not sure what the bill is, but I can check and see.
Great, thank you.
Nancy asks, can you speak more about the provisions for planting and protecting trees?
Well, the Growth Management Act only has some pretty general requirements for planting trees. But there are lots of model ordinances out there, and there's a model ordinance that our State Department of Natural Resources has put together under the Evergreen Communities program and requirements that you have to meet to be certified as an evergreen community. The bill that's in the legislature will actually require DNR to be a little bit more specific on those, both the criteria that they use for the evergreen communities designation and also their model ordinance. And there's other model ordinances as well out there. The National Arbor Day Foundation has a model ordinance, and there's several other ones as well. And so you can get an ordinance that is sort of customized to or that looks good for your community, and then you can customize it and adopt it. And definitely for requirements for actually planting trees and retaining trees, you want to make sure that they work in your community. So you want to make sure that it's the kind of tree that can grow in your community, and that it's planted right. If it's going to be a street tree, you want to do it in such a way that the roots are going to disrupt the sidewalks, a variety of things like that. But there's a lot of resources out there to help cities and counties do that right.
Thank you.
We're right at 7 p.m. But Tim, you did say that you'd stay a bit longer if that's okay.
Yep.
And we
Yay,
do
thank
have
you.
about 7 more questions. So
let's answer them.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay.
So thanks for staying. We appreciate it. Vivian asks, we have seen some communities lose their charm from overbuilding. Is there a point when the price of staying within the growth areas is too high? For example, loss of urban trees within the limits.
Well, that's a question that each jurisdiction and each person has to decide for themselves. There's some people who love living on Capitol Hill, where densities are in the 200 and 300 units per acre. There's a lot of people who would never want to live on Capitol Hill and prefer things much more moderate than that. So to some degree, people have to make their own choices. But again, communities can make their choices. If you're a city in Snohomish County, as part of the countywide planning policies, you can sit down with other cities and talk to them about how the growth should be allocated to do it. And, you know, there are also certain parts of communities that you can choose not to grow. You know, if you've got a historic district that your community really values, have development regulations that are consistent with that historic district, and then you can plan for higher density growth elsewhere in your community. So there's a lot of different steps that you can take to manage growth. You know, and some jurisdictions have done a really good job of it, and some jurisdictions haven't. And you know, you probably have your own opinions on that.
Thank you. David asks, impact fees in the past have never covered the cost for new schools or other services needed for new communities. Do you ever see this changing, or is this just the way development works in our county?
Well, there was a proposal just last year to increase the transportation impact fees. So, you know, I think at some point the county is going to be raising its impact fees because it just needs the money and doesn't have another source for it. It's probably never going to, you know, cover 100% of the cost. And in fact, it actually can't cover 100% of the cost, but it can cover 99% of it if the jurisdiction wants to, but that's pretty rare. But I think as jurisdictions get to the point where they just don't have another funding source, you know, I think impact fees are going to go up.
Thank you.
Carol asks, is there an accepted definition for low income, or does it depend on the situation and the neighborhood?
There are both accepted definitions and categories of low income, depending on, you know, there's very low income, and they're typically based on a percentage of the county median income. Low, for example, is 60% of the county median of families that earn that adjusted for family size. And then there's also a definition of affordability. To be considered affordable, you cannot spend more than 30%, about, you know, roughly about 30% of your income for housing. If you spend more than that, you're considered cost overburdened, and that housing is not considered affordable.
Thank you.
The area is close to, Joan asked, the area is close to the Puget Sound that lies within the UGA is deeply affected by being inside the UGA. Now the UGA designation has placed dense development close to the Sound. The impact is devastating to the health of the Sound and its wildlife. Often this is prime view property. Would it be wise to take the areas closer to the Sound out of the UGA that still lies in the unincorporated sectors? What would give it more protection?
Well, that's what happens when something is UGA, then it's going to be planned for urban development. A lot of the coast has already been developed that's in the UGA, but for parts that aren't, I agree that taking that out of the urban growth area makes a lot of sense. It makes sense both to protect the Sound. We now know, for example, that the trees along the Sound have the same environmental benefits as trees along rivers. They provide food for salmon. The shade even matters on the Sound, believe it or not, because the shallows can heat up because they're shallow. So protecting that is good for the environment, but it also can be good for property owners. We're going to see sea level rise. We already are seeing sea level rise. We're seeing slopes that are failing along Puget Sound. Some of those places just aren't good places for growth, but they're great places for marine riparian forests. And so if there are opportunities to take that land out of the UGA, it should be definitely taken out of the UGA.
Great, here's a comment from Kristen. Some of the problems with cities annexing is the fire district's opposition. This has happened twice in Snohomish County with unincorporated areas between Linwood and Bothell. The citizens campaigned heavily to get annexed to Bothell, but the fire district didn't want it, so it didn't happen.
Yes, it's not just fire districts, it can sometimes be other special districts. Um, Local governments have had some good luck working with those jurisdictions on transition planning and providing them with bridge financing, things like that. There have also been jurisdictions that have an agreement with their fire district or their sewer district or their water district that their employees are going to be hired by the city when the land's annexed, and that they're going to be held harmless as far as pay. So there are some models out there on how to deal with it. But yeah, that's exactly right. And one of one of the good news is that um, firefighters are really good spokespeople. We all respect firefighters. They put their lives on the line for us.
Mm.
They save lives. And we've had some really good partnerships with firefighters where they've been excellent spokespeople for us. But that can sometimes work the other way as well. So to the extent that the city can work cooperatively with fire districts and other special districts, I think that is a potential solution, but it can be hard.
Great.
Well, once again, Tim, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's really been a wealth of information, and we're so grateful for you to take the time to come and talk to us. Nancy, do you want to talk a little bit about where we can all watch it again?
Well, this has been recorded, and it will be on the League of Women Voters YouTube page. And we will be sending out a follow-up email with that information as soon as it gets posted. So please be looking forward to that. And thank you everyone for your great questions. They were wonderful. Really appreciate it. All right.
And I wanted to say that the chat will have contact information for our organizations, Futurewise, Sierra Club, and League of Women Voters. And I also want to thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you all for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Good night, everyone.